Whoever you are and whatever it is you do, if there's something you really want, it's because that desire originated in the soul of the universe. It is your mission on Earth. As in this quote from the beloved novel, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, what drew me to CIIS in the beginning was a deep desire in my heart and my soul. I had been obsessed for a few years with consciousness studies. My interest in this topic burgeoned in 2011 when suddenly I was immersed in the journal writings of thinkers like David Chalmers, who proposed the hard problem of consciousness, Stuart Hameroff, who created the first quantum theory of consciousness, and Nassim Haramein, who combined physics and sacred geometry in ways in YouTube lectures that were like portals into another universe. All these thinkers showed that it's possible to approach science from a non-materialist perspective. Coming from a background in biochemistry as an undergrad, this was quite simply blowing my mind in the most positive and inspiring way. Additionally, at the same time, I was learning how to meditate and took a class on developing one's intuition. There we performed a partner's exercise in telepathy, which activated abilities of clairvoyance and precognition within me. Ever since then, I've been studying these psychic abilities and forming theories as to their modes of operation. I also participated in several ayahuasca ceremonies and eventually experienced a gradual Kundalini awakening, rising, and culmination, after which I began to see a mass amount of synchronicities in my daily life. I felt as if I was immersed in a web of living meaning that had its own soul and will, the anima mundi. That was the traditional name for this concept. So I continued this work at CIIS. The main trope of my work at CIIS involves the synthesis of science and mysticism. More specifically, I aim to unite electromagnetic and quantum theories of consciousness with archetypal psychology. The method that has developed for me to consolidate these different fields emerged gradually. As I already mentioned, after experiencing many mystical experiences, I noticed a boost to my cognitive abilities and pattern recognition. As a result, I'm used to interpreting seemingly non-related sequences of events through acausal connections, and likewise putting together different sources of scholarly information through correlation. And correlation, of course, speaks to the heart of the problem, the hard problem of consciousness, in that materialist scientists are aiming to show that material neuroscience is the cause of consciousness, but so far they can only be related through correlation. In Jacob Sherman's class, The Book of Nature, I discovered that resemblance and relations, the kind that I see in my daily life, are actually an ancient tenet of Hermeticism and alchemy. I was really taken aback by Michel Foucault's reading of The Order of Things, which presents this principle of correspondence in modern terms. Likewise, I was also very happy to notice that alchemy related to my very first synchronicity, which involved Paulo Coelho's book, The Alchemist, from which I quoted in the beginning. So this made me realize that the impulse to unite science and mysticism has existed in these ancient disciplines. Likewise, the same course immersed me into worlds of symbolism and participatory mystical traditions of the world. I learned the way different saints and clairvoyants have viewed archetypal reality. Later in Becca Tarnas's class, Cosmos and Psyche, I would learn the name for this kind of archetypal perception, and that's the archetypal I, a phrase coined by the psychologist James Hillman. Of course, the phrase archetype also comes from Carl Jung, and the summer before the beginning of CIIS, I joined a study group run by Matt Switzer on the Black Books of Carl Jung. And there I was immersed into his archetypal theory properly for the first time. And I was so delighted to see that archetypal experience, the kind that I have been experiencing for many years, is a genuine human ability and experience, and that there already existed a solid amount of work from which to base more research on. In Carrie Welch's classes, we were put onto the work of Carl Jung and the physicist Wolfgang Pauli, who collaborated for 26 years. Together, they established a conceptual base for the archetype as a field of energy. And this is also the way I have begun to conceptualize the archetype as well. And this field of energy acts not only locally in the space, but it can also act non-locally across distances of space and even time. And as such, it would make this field a virtual field. In Jack Backby's and Debashish Banerjee's class, Bergson, Deleuze, and Aurobindo, we were introduced to the philosophy of Gilles Deleuze, who spent considerable time discussing the concept of the virtual. He called it the difference between different repetitions, and this difference escapes conceptual and causal explanation. Likewise, in Matt Segal's classes, Whitehead Cosmology specifically, we read Catherine Keller's The Face of the Deep, and she in the same way envisions all of reality as permeated by a virtual ground of depth, from which different manifestations arise like droplets out of the ocean and fall back in. It is these readings that made me realize that perhaps the collective unconscious, too, permeates all of space-time as a field of energy, rather than is stored only in individual minds, brains, or bodies. Of course, Carrie Welch's and Matt Segal's classes did a lot to ground this concept of the virtual in physics, electromagnetism, and cognitive science. In Carrie Welch's modern physics class, we were introduced to David Bohm in his reading of wholeness and implicate order and his holographic theory. Now, this really spoke to me because I've always had an insight or an intuition that clairvoyance could be explained by holography, as well that light and consciousness are connected. And this is because the brightest and most vibrant visions always are followed by the most positive synchronistic events. So when I researched this connection between light and consciousness, I was surprised to discover that there's already a whole set of electromagnetic theories of consciousness in existence, and they have gathered considerable interest in consciousness studies. For this reason, I was very interested in holographic theory. Likewise, in Matt Segal's class, Whitehead Cosmology and Process Approaches to Consciousness, we learned a lot about Alfred North Whitehead's philosophy, and he as well emphasized the importance of the electromagnetic epoch of the universe. And he explained all of quantum physics, which was just emerging in his time, in his own cryptic language. As well, he applied quantum physics to experience as well itself. And between these classes of Carrie Welch and Matt Segal, I found many connections between consciousness, quantum physics, electromagnetism, and cognitive science. In Matt Segal's class, we were also introduced to the research of Michael Levin on bioelectricity in ecological and biological systems. And this drew attention to the collectivizing property of energy. Then in Carrie Welch's classes, we were also introduced to HeartMath Institute, which studies the biofield of the body. And one of the biggest energetic fields of the body is the one that comes from the heart. And this has been scientifically proven and measured to extend several feet out around the body. So here is when I began to understand that it is our biofield perhaps merges with the geomagnetic fields of the earth, the larger biofields of the earth. In the same way, I've been interested in superorganisms and their energetic fields for quite some years, the way birds and fish and insects exhibit collective behavior as if aligned to one field. So I began to understand that perhaps humans too, with their own biofield, use the geomagnetic fields of the Earth to align the way insects and superorganisms do for navigation. We use it as well for a kind of intuitive guidance, as in the collective unconscious. In Beccatana's class, Cosmos and Psyche, I began to think of fields in the macro way, that is, the fields created by rotations of planets. Rotation and vibration are similar concepts because they both have cycles, frequencies, and describe the actions of energy. So in this way, I began to see that they could be creating fields that are responsible for causing synchronistic events on Earth, which Richard Tarnas described in his book Cosmos and Psyches. In this class, I began to think of fields through resonance of different frequencies across scales, and different virtual fields entangling each other across different scales, and thus entangling information from different non-local spaces. The zodiac chart, of course, with its transits and aspects and all that network, reminded me also of integrated information theory, which I was very enamored with at the beginning of CIIS. In my beginning essay, in my entrance essay, I actually wanted to apply this theory to a collective study of synchronicity. And I got to do just that in an elective class by Dr. Daniel Deslauriers, Integral Research. I performed a small pilot study with 30 subjects on collective synchronicity, group synchronicity, and it worked very well. I got a lot of connections. But I learned 3 things from this project. One is that I'm not 100% sure that I should impose synchronistic experiences onto people, whereas letting archetypes remain autonomous the way they usually are. And the second thing I learned is that so many connections that arose from even 30 subjects were hard to document into a verbal report, so we needed some kind of new methodology. And the third thing I learned is that integrated information theory is mostly mathematical, and to apply this collective experiment to mathematically, I would need a lot more people and a lot more effort. It is doable, but perhaps in the future I will dedicate more time to it. In the meantime, I found a personal niche in arts-based research, which was also introduced in Dr. Deslauriers' class. I realized that I have been doing this kind of research myself for many years through photography, and I actually developed my own methods, or I could say they developed themselves rather. The first one I call the spontaneous photographic capture of archetypal image resemblances, and I've already mentioned the importance of resemblances. It's also reminded me of Paul Kammerer's theory of seriality, and he, unlike Jung, who studied the connection between a psychic event and a physical event, Kammerer saw connections in purely physical events, and this is the way my photographs are as well. And then the second method that I developed is the spontaneous photographic capture of luminous artifacts. And there's different light splotches and things that are left in photographs. But for me, they have a lot of symbolic significance and synchronistic significance. And I think this relates to Sri Aurobindo speaking of luminous phenomena being the sign of the supermind or the supersense. Now, in Dr. Alan Combs' class, elective class, I wrote a paper that was published in the Journal of Conscious Evolution, which is associated with PCC. And I also presented this paper in front of my classmates and teachers at the retreat. And here, what I basically try to outline are the boundaries of the virtual field, whether it be between here and the spatial horizon, or here and the temporal horizon as in precognition. And I used Henry Bergson's theory to explicate this. And here is where we come in the planes of consciousness, which outline these boundaries of the field. And there's communication happening between different planes, which happens dimensionally. So this I plan to take into my PhD to explicate 5D consciousness. But the idea of planes is also relevant to other thinkers like Jean Gebser with his structure of consciousness, Teilhard de Chardin with physiosphere, biosphere, and noosphere, and Sri Aurobindo with matter, life, mind, and supermind. And of course, the one thing that I would gather from the planes of consciousness is that the higher plane of consciousness that we all tap into is Gaia. And this is why it's important, because by tapping into this higher plane, we effectively tap into our higher self and our mission on Earth. And this relates also to Sean Kelly's book, Coming Home, where he describes the concept of Gaia in the Introduction to PCC class. So as this class began, this program began, so it ends. As above, so below. And I plan to continue this work into my PhD. Thank you so much.